Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat. You can drop your name and any affiliations that you have so we can see who's in the room. My name is Leticia Hernandez, and I'm with the Center for Land-Based Learning. I will be your facilitator for this discussion. This is our first in our Field to Future Cultivated Conversations series. These quarterly discussions will explore topics at the intersection of agriculture, land and resource management, technology and innovation, while diving into industry impacts, challenges, and opportunities. Since it's March, I also want to take a moment to celebrate Women's History Month. A special shout out to all the incredible women in our audience, and especially to the women leading today's discussion or joining us in today's discussion. We have an important and timely topic to explore today, and that is smoke exposure in wine grapes and the ways wildfires are affecting the West Coast wine industry. Our speakers bring deep knowledge and firsthand experience, and I'm excited to dive into this conversation with all of you. And we can start with a fun little icebreaker question for our panelists. We have Elizabeth and Natalie here with us today. And if you can go ahead and give us an introduction, and when was your first time you knew that you were interested in working in the wine industry?
Natalie, do you want to take that first?
I'm happy to. I'm Natalie Collins. I'm the president of the California Association of Wine Grape Growers. We are a statewide group here in California that focuses on advocacy for wine grape growers. I joined the association in 2015, but my real first introduction to wine was in college. I was an agricultural business major at California State University, Chico. And as an elective, you can take an Introduction to Wines course. And really why I took the course was it was a wine tasting course where you got to learn about wine. But in doing so, it was much more than that to me. You really got to learn about different regions, different varietals, a lot of the science into making wine. And I really fell in love with not only how complex wine is, but also just how exciting and fun. So that was really my introduction into wine. After college, I continued to work in ag and was just hoping to find my way back to the wine industry. And here I am today.
I was going to say they always hook you with the wine tastings, Natalie, and then you get brought in with other things. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Tomasino. I'm a professor of enology at Oregon State Research. Oh my God, I can't even talk. Oregon State University, and I'm a member of the Oregon Wine Research Institute. I'm also a program director for a USDA Specialty Crop Research Initiative on grape smoke exposure and smoke taint in wine. And I do a lot of work on wine flavor chemistry and wine sensory, with a lot of that focused on strategies for grape smoke exposure and what we can do in the winery as well. And I had to think about when I first got interested in the wine industry. I actually knew I wanted to do food science, like back when I started college in 2001, maybe something like that. And then I did a summer abroad in Italy, and I didn't meet a winemaker. Oddly enough, I ended up chatting with an enologist at one of the wineries. So I learned about actually the science part before I ever got my fingers wet making wine or anything. And I liked the fact that there's so many different types of science. You're not just sitting in a microscope. I get to go out in the field. I get to play with chemistry. I get to taste wine. I get to interact with a lot of people. Most of the wine regions are at pretty awesome locations. And I was pretty hooked. And then literally from grad school going into my master's, I've been wine since about 2004. So yeah, I remember my entrance to grad school was about how wine was a science and an art. And that did get me into Cornell. So I think that was a good essay.
That's a good way to put it, a science and an art.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that's perfect because we're here to learn a little bit more about the science and especially about how a smoke exposure in wine grapes is affecting the industry. And so if you can touch a little bit on the science, and then we can dive into our conversation.
Certainly. So wildfire has many devastating effects. We're going to be talking about a specific thing that currently is pretty unique to wine grapes, may also be having an impact to hops, but the actual mechanism is pretty unique to wine. And we think it's because of how you take grapes and then it goes through wine making, where lots of things don't go through that special process. So essentially, if you have smoke from a wildfire in the air and it goes into your vineyard and there are grapes on the vine, there are the compounds in smoke that make it smell. So, you have particles that make it hazy, but we're interested in the things that make smoke smell. Those land on your grapes and can get absorbed into the skin. So it's actually sort of sucked into at a very, very, very tiny microscopic scale into the cellular structure of the skin. And it immediately starts to get bound to sugars. And the reason I say this is because you can smell these aroma compounds in smoke, but the minute they get bound to sugars in the grape, you can't smell or taste them anymore. So you might have a smoke event, go out to your vineyard, taste your grapes, be like, hey, these taste great. That's because they've been bound. All these biochemical processes are happening. They attach to sugar. This happens to a lot of aroma and flavor compounds in grapes. It's during fermentation when these compounds are released again. So the first couple days of fermentation, these compounds can be released. And if you have enough smoke and the right kind of smoke, which I'm going to talk a little bit about because we're getting more information on what the right kind of smoke is. They get released and all of a sudden it's not smoky like you might have your wine in a oak barrel. It's this smoky and aftertaste that's very ashy that put together and at high enough levels is considered a really negative quality. And it does take quite a bit to get to that very negative, like people make faces when they taste the wine. We don't want people to make a bad face. We want people to smile and say we like our wine. So and that can happen during fermentation. So those are sort of the chemistry of it. And the compounds we currently look for are things called volatile phenols. So it's very much when you burn wood, lignin combustion makes these compounds. So it smells smoky. I think a bunch of them kind of smell like cigarette smoke in particular. Sometimes it's sort of like a nice kind of smoke. Like I do enjoy a light early campfire smell. But again, at high enough concentrations, it's not considered nice in any manner. And there's some other ones that are thought to also contribute, but we're still working on figuring those out. So I'm sort of really going to be talking about the well-established markers that the industry uses for that. So they're called these volatile phenols, or a lot of us talk about them from a smoke standpoint, specifically as smoke phenols. So when you go outside or you're grilling something or, there's campfires around and you smell it, it's primarily these smoke phenols, and those are what go into the grapes, get bound to sugars, and then get released again during fermentation. And unfortunately, because fortunately, wine has ethanol on a low pH. So, food safety standpoint, we love wine, not a problem. But that low pH also means that as a wine ages, the smoke compounds can be released. So it can get worse as you leave a bottle to age for a while. But yeah, so there's sort of this time period that you might be like, oh, my wine tastes great. And then you leave it for 6 months and you open another bottle and, oh, it doesn't taste that great anymore. So wine is this big sort of, coming from a bit of a chemistry background, we call it a little biochemical factory of changing things all the time that very much influence how you smell and taste and enjoy that wine. So not all smoke is problematic, and this is where things get complicated, guys. So I'm going to give you a little sensory lesson for a question, because just because you have a compound doesn't mean you can smell or taste it. So there's a couple different things we call sensory thresholds. So there are concentrations where you don't smell anything. And some of this comes down to the fact of your genetics. So at least 50% of you don't smell vanilla for the true vanilla compound. 50% of the population doesn't have the receptors to smell it. But imitation vanilla is a different compound, and you can smell that. So you experience a different vanilla. And there are lots of things that you don't know you can't smell because no one ever tested you on it. It's very interesting to see. But it is due to your genetics. So we have concentrations, you can't smell anything. This includes everyone. It's low enough, there's not enough to send a signal to the brain. You increase that concentration, you can start to notice a difference. So you go, oh, something smells different. And this is what's known as a perception threshold. So again, a signal is going to the brain, but we can't really describe what that is. So the concentration keeps going up and the product is described as different. And then we finally reach a concentration where you go, oh, that's ashy. And that's called the recognition threshold. So you can put a name onto what it is. And that's the concentration we're really interested in for smoke taint, because that's when people, it's very close to this recognition threshold. There's something called a consumer rejection threshold. And that's where people are like, no, I don't want that product anymore. So particularly with negative things, the recognition and the consumer rejection are fairly close together. But if you're below these points, the wine's different. It's not actually bad, but it's different. And the reason why I'm giving you this kind of complicated explanation here is because smoke depends on how much smoke you have in the vineyard. It depends on if you maybe have multiple smoke events. It depends on how close you are to the burn site. I'll talk about that for a minute. But just because you have smoke doesn't mean you're going to have ashy wine. You might have had enough smoke, so it's just a little different. It's not going to be your perfect bottle of wine that you've done every single year, but it's still going to be a bottle of wine you could drink and enjoy. And then there are circumstances where it's like, oh, that tastes ashy. That's a problem. And that's where we start. And a lot of research is focusing on, we want to be able to bring that ashy taste down into that, oh, this is still a nice wine. It's not ashy anymore. And we're working very hard on trying to figure out just how much smoke it takes to get there, because there's a lot of different variations. I've mentioned a few, how long the smoke event is. We know at some of the very heavy, depending on where you are, 2020 had very heavy smoke. I know we kind of looked like the apocalypse up here in Corvallis. It was blowing its way from 2 different locations. 6 hours of very heavy smoke is enough to be a problem in Pinot Noir. I just said Pinot Noir because it is varietal dependent, and some varieties can handle it a bit more than others. Oregon has a lot of Pinot, so I taste, and we smoke out a lot of Pinot, so I know smoked out Pinot Noir is pretty icky. Personal opinion right there. But there are other wines, and we don't quite understand why yet. We have a lot of people looking into why certain grapes can handle it a bit better than others. It is a problem for red wines because the skins go through fermentation. So all those smoke compounds really accumulate in the skins. And because white wine making, the skins are removed beforehand and they don't have that exposure to the ethanol during fermentation, I want to say you might be able to salvage your white wines much more so than your red wines. Red wines, because skins go through fermentation, ethanol is produced. Ethanol extracts phenols very nicely. And we know smoke is sort of extracted at the start of fermentation. So there were some lovely theories we've myth busted at this point in time, that removing skins doesn't really help in that aspect. So that's one of the reasons primarily we really worry about red wines, because the skins go through and you get a high extraction of these compounds. But one of the most up-to-date things we've worked on, though we can't give you a metric because I am working with atmospheric scientists, like distance times time times wind speed times temperature times a couple other things that I don't remember. It's like a 6-unit measurement that I don't know. The closer you are to the actual fire, the more these compounds are in the air. So the closer you are to, say you have a vineyard right next to an active fire and the smoke's pouring in, and then you have one, and for lack of sake of talking about this, I'm going to say like 100 miles out. So the smoke's traveled a few hours, quite a bit of distance. It's old by the time it gets to the second vineyard. That first vineyard is going to be much more heavily impacted than the farther away vineyard. And that's just because these compounds react with things in the air and it turns them into things that don't smell anymore. So think about how if you do go camping, you've had your lovely fire from the night before, you put it out, go to bed, cut up the next morning. It still smells smoky, but it's a different smell. That's because those compounds change over time. And they're not as problematic. So part of that new stuff is we're trying to figure out what is this definition of new versus old smoke, or, what's your distance with wind speed? As I said, it's not a simple Someone said 20 miles out, and I was like, depends on what the wind is that day. If it's a light breeze, maybe you're fine. If it's a heavy gust, you might have a problem. So it's essentially not all, because I know for particularly in 2020 and some subsequent years, it was like, oh, we had smoke, so we have a problem. Not all smoke is a problem. The complexity of the problem now is figuring out which smoke is, so that then the vineyard managers we're going to pick our grapes, or we're not going to pick our grapes, or we're going to pick our grapes, but then we have to do something in the winery to do something. So we're really trying to figure out this metric and what we can do in the vineyard to provide that information. I've learned way too much about weather than I ever thought. I'm sure, Natalie, you now know way too much than you ever thought you wanted to about weather. So that's, and I think the grape variety is more exposed to smoke exposure. We certainly can see this, but it's also very hard to do a perfect comparison. And again, we don't know why. As I mentioned before, I think Pinot Noir is particularly susceptible. I've had some pretty bad Petit Verdot, but also in comparison, and because I'm in Oregon, I compare everything to Pinot Noir. I think Cabernet Sauvignon can hold up a little bit more. And so we know Syrah actually can handle quite a bit of smoke in comparison. So yeah, there are, it's not a one size fits all, and it's not a all smoke is equal problem. So it makes it very complicated, and Natalie has to deal with a lot of the things around that.
It is quite complicated. Can you share a little bit more about your processes in the lab and how you're actually doing?
Oh, certainly. So we sort of call it this big air to glass project, and we're starting it at both ends, because you got to start somewhere. And we have enough people working on this grant. We start at both ends, and what I mean by that is we have a lot of things out in vineyards measuring air. We have a lot of special tools when there's smoke, where we go out and try and specifically measure the smoke, because one of the challenges with smoke and air is we're not entirely sure what we should be measuring. So for health, people measure PM 2.5. It's a particulate matter that is related to, if you breathe it in, you have health issues. So there's lots of measurements on that. But we're looking at things smaller than PM 2.5. Aroma compounds are super teeny tiny. And there are sensors that will measure all aroma compounds in air. And even if you can't smell things in the air, trust me, there's a lot in the air. There is nothing that measures just the compounds we're looking for. And also, unfortunately, a lot of these sensors arrays are very expensive. So we have our Opens engineering lab here at OSU, who's created some starting air sensors for us that will not break the bank while we're trying to figure out what these measurements are. And then we have a lot of people. We also do, because we will never, ever be the cause of a fire starting in the field. We look at what we call natural smoke events. And then when we don't have natural smoke events, we do research smoke events. So we have these big cages that we put up over, currently ours can handle about 3 vines, though Tom Collins has a couple that does 20 or so for that. And we smoke out, kind of like you smoke meat, we smoke out grapevines for the years when it doesn't happen naturally, or sometimes we use really special fuel that's tagged in a specific way. And then we do lab analysis on measuring smoke markers in the grapes. And then we take those grapes and we do these small ferments and we measure the smoke in the wine, because there is still sort of this, we're trying to predict from grape measurements how bad it is in the wine. And there's a lot of work looking at that. And then from the other side, which I primarily work on, is at what concentration can people smell and perceive this in the wine? What's it a problem? Because that gives you this sort of economic threshold of, we got to keep it under this. And then there's a lot of work working on processing that only removes smoke compounds. So the big issue with trying to make wine taste better and remove this ashiness is it also takes away things that make the wine taste nice. So a lot of mitigation doesn't help the problem. It just makes a lower quality wine. So there's a lot of work on, and this is in general in chemistry, being really specific is really hard. And doing it in a manner like people could use it. Because someone was like, just do this. And it's like, yeah, you have $1 billion piece of equipment to do that? I don't. no one in the wine industry is going to use that. I sort of looked at them. It's like, be realistic here. Think about people using things. Or, someone's like, do this. And I was just like, it's not food grade. You can't add that to and like have people consume it afterwards. So there's a lot. So we're sort of taking it from these ends and moving our way towards the middle. And there are many, many people involved in this project. And we have other projects with the USDA ARS and American Vineyard Foundation funds some, and Oregon Wine Board, Washington Wine Growers. I'm sure Natalie, I'm missing some people in the whole scheme of things, but there's a lot of people working on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's perfect segue to our next section. And exactly, it sounds like industry's responding with funding to help support some of this research that you're doing. And Natalie, can you tell us a little bit more about how the industry has responded to smoke exposure, especially with the 2020 California fires?
Of course, yeah. And what I was going to share at the beginning is Elizabeth and I both first got to know each other really around wildfire smoke. And one of my favorite things about Elizabeth is that she can put very complex research into easier to understand. I won't say very easy.
Sometimes I nerd out, but like I recognize when I do that.
Yeah,
you now have some chemistry and sensory trivia that you can impress people with.
Exactly. But she puts it in much easier to understand terminology, which really helps us when we're on the advocacy side, trying to get funding through Congress or other sources, if we are then also able to explain it in a little bit more of a digestible way. So when the 2017-2018 wildfires started to happen, we really understood that this is an industry issue. Those fires in both years were a little more regionally specific, maybe a smaller fire in Napa, something in Oregon. They weren't as widespread as 2020. But in that 17 and 18 years, as an industry, the entire West Coast, California, Oregon, and Washington really got together and launched a West Coast Smoke Exposure Task Force. And this is a group that, again, makes up leadership from all three states, very involved in working with the researchers at UC Davis, Oregon State, and Washington State, in really ensuring that we are all on the same page. We started in those early years looking at funding through Congress of what can be done to get research funding. When 2020 hit, those were devastating wildfires, as Elizabeth mentioned, along the West Coast. These were during the COVID times, but if you may remember, it really felt like we were in an apocalypse from every sense. The smoke was thick in all parts of the state. You saw California Central Valley, which maybe didn't have as many wildfires, close in proximity. The entire air in the Central Valley was also very, very thick. So just in that 2020 year, we estimate that it was around 165,000 to 325,000 tons of wine grapes that went unharvested due to actual loss or perceived loss. And I know those are really large numbers that don't really mean anything, but if you equate that 1 ton of wine grapes makes about 756 bottles of wine. So if you're talking about 165,000 tons, that's over 125 million bottles. And that was just on the low end of loss. So very large, just on the base of that fruit, the fruit alone was worth $601 million. And then if you look at all of the losses that were into, actual wine sales, et cetera, it was over $2.8 billion. So a very large loss to the industry. And when we look at total economic loss, that includes things like loss from wine grapes. But as you know, wildfires also destroyed many actual physical wineries. They destroyed tractors. They destroyed, a lot of things. Loss is over $3.5 billion. So we obviously understood the impact of wildfires, what it did to our industry in just 1 year alone. We've advocated through Congress for wildfire research smoke, which is actually housed through USDA Agricultural Research Service. And we've been successful in the last 6 fiscal cycles in getting funding. This year for FY 2025, we have $5 million in funding. And that funding, again, we have a lead researcher through ARS that leads research, but also in partnership with Elizabeth at Oregon State, Washington State, and UC Davis. So this funding has really been a partnership between USDA and between the 3 land-grant universities on the West Coast. But, we didn't obviously just stop there. Research was only one piece of it. We also found that in 2020 that wine grape growers who can apply for federal crop insurance, we found some gaps in crop insurance, and that, in something as devastating as those wildfire years, that crop insurance alone did not cover, anywhere near the full loss that wine grape growers suffered. So we helped.
And Natalie, I think it's a unique problem from a crop insurance. We've never had it happen before.
Absolutely. And a lot of what happened with crop insurance is we needed the research to actually kind of help dictate crop insurance terms. So a lot of the funding that we're getting, ties directly into crop insurance.
Oh, I know part of some of the analysis I talked about, we're trying to give them much better. This is the number where it's a problem in grapes, because currently it's just smoke.
Yeah, and they need thresholds to test for, right? Something to pay off of. And a lot of what Elizabeth was talking about is from a grower perspective and community, a lot of the times these wildfire events happen during harvest, like in the height of harvest. So anywhere from July to we harvest clear into October. So usually wildfires happen, I hate to call it wildfire season, but it kind of lines up with wine grape harvest season. But we need in the vineyard to be able to make real time and quick decisions on whether or not a grower is going to harvest or not. So a lot of what Elizabeth is leading the way on is trying to get tools into the vineyard to be able to test in real time, or at least labs that can return results quickly. So a lot of, obviously, the research ties into every other aspect. But looking at crop insurance, we also tried to develop or see if we could develop a endorsement on a policy that just accounted for wildfire smoke. And I'm proud to share that we successfully, in this year, 2025 in California, wine grape growers will be able to add on an endorsement to crop insurance called the Fire Insurance Production Smoke Index that directly accounts for wildfire smoke. That's something rolled out in California this year, and hopefully next year it'll roll out in Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. So that is a direct result of the industry coming together, trying to find actionable changes to better protect growers. And then, of course, we try to advocate for more funding for general disaster relief. As I think everyone on this call is well aware, wildfires are just one of the many challenges we face with a changing climate. Things from very high heat events during harvest to frost, you name it. So just another tool. And I'd say lastly, we've really tried to work on education. A lot of what that West Coast Smoke Exposure Task Force does is tries to work with the researchers to get the industry, here's the latest in research, come together as an industry and really discuss what are next steps, what are gaps, where are areas that, the great research that's being done, how can we turn it into practical tools that can be used in a vineyard or winery. So through that task force, we host an annual smoke summit, which is virtual, usually has folks from all over the world on the call, as wildfire smoke is also not just an issue in the US. Australia has long had issues in wildfire smoke, as have many other countries. And I'm sure Elizabeth can comment. Researchers from all over the place have been doing this work, kind of maybe even before it became an issue here. I don't know if you want to comment on that, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say that Australians really pioneered a lot of this starting 2010s, because that was really where their extreme droughts, and then they were having the weather that sort of goes along with very extreme droughts does have fire. So the Australians really were the pioneers. And then I want to say in California, the West Coast, we'd heard about it. We knew research was happening, but we hadn't had a big problem. And then 2017 happened. And I think that was really the drive for a lot of, that's when I started to get involved. We've been trying to, some of the larger funding we've been trying to go through. And then of course, 2020 happened, which it was a problem for everyone on the West Coast and elsewhere. And we've had different parts of the West Coast have had fires every single year. We tip our hats to Southern Oregon because Northern California fires always tend to go into Southern Oregon. And I know parts of Washington, and I want to say, I might be messing up my county, Santa Barbara County and more Southern California have had ones on and off. So nothing on that huge scale, but certainly these small ones, particularly if you have vineyards nearby, are a problem for those vineyards. And Spain is starting to show problems, Italy, southern France. It's interesting because I feel like they're now where we were in 2017, where people are like, it's not really a problem. And it's like, well, we're here when you realize it's a problem, because they grow a lot of very similar grapes that we do. But yeah, the Australians really pioneered, and now we have people not just in wine, we have people in crop, we have people, engineers, we have atmospheric scientists, we have modelers, we have economics, genetics, microbiologists. I mean, we have so many people looking at so many different things, because that's really how you make progress. And I know and Natalie gets to see the big picture and all these things come together because we run a lot of those meetings. So it's one of those, like, there has been made some good progress. As with everything, some things haven't worked out, but we're definitely striving forward for things that the industry will be able to use in the upcoming years. And that really goes to a lot of the funding that Natalie and others have done for this, because that's always a challenge, particularly on wine grapes and wine. Federal government does not necessarily like to support just wine things, going back to our history, more than 100 years ago. But that's really helped make strides, because of course, when big problems happen, you get more solutions by having a lot of people working on a lot of different things. And we have a lot of people working on a lot of different things, and we're noticing things that it's like, yeah, that didn't work, let's go do something else. But a lot of them, it's like, oh, that worked, okay, we're going to keep going, we're going to keep working to getting to the point where, as I said, I see in a couple of years, it's like, yeah, there's going to be something for the industry, or you're going to be able to know that, like, I went out and, I don't know, pH meter or something in the air, and I got this measurement, and my grapes should be good.
I'll comment on that, Elizabeth. We talked about support, and obviously the industry, we push for funding, but we are very fortunate, California, Oregon, and Washington, to have very strong elected representation. Yes. In Washington, D.C. Yeah. So California Senator Alex Padilla, Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, very big supporters of the industry, as well as California Congressman Mike Thompson, Doug LaMolfa. The four of them actually just last week introduced a wildfire smoke exposure research bill, and they're pushing for 5 years of research funding at about $6.5 million a year, and that would be included in the Farm Bill. So what that kind of bill would allow us to do is have 5 years of guaranteed funding. Right now, we are having to go back to the federal budget every single year and try to get funds appropriated for wildfire smoke research. If I think we knew, we have 5 years at this much money, we would be able to carry out longer term research projects. So very appreciative of the value and support that many of our elected officials, they recognize the impact of the industry on the West Coast. So I just wanted to ensure that we have very good partners back in Washington, D.C.
Well, and I would say, I think they also, and you guys do such a good way, because I'm so focused on production, growing grapes, making wine, but smoke affects everything, including tourism. And because so many people are like, well, but will my wine taste bad? And it's like, no one's going to release a wine that tastes bad, but you might not be able to find your favorite wine. And I know that some of the numbers you did, Natalie, that's just from that year. So there are multiple things that happen. And I do know research is really we're trying to figure out measurements. We're trying to see if we can stop the compounds getting uptake to the grapes, which is harder than you think, because you also need the grapes to ripen and taste nice. But then we're also looking at, should they get in there? Can we just remove them afterwards so you can still have your great wine, so people can enjoy it? So people want to still come out to the vineyards and see all these amazing things. But yeah, this is something, and I want to say, in all the years of research, I don't think we've ever had such a coordinated effort across researchers, across our different institutes, the Wine Institute, COG, Oregon Wine Board. I'm not going to list all the different ones because there's a lot of them, and with support from the government happening. And particularly that new bill is going to be exciting, because weather is hard to do research on, things that are based on weather. That's why we have these, we call them smoke cages, because it might not happen that year. We don't want it to happen, but I tease every now and then. It's like one really good one, just in one spot, would be great. But I'm sure you're sitting there, everyone being like, as long as it's not my spot.
Yeah.
So that's why we're like, we have these other things. So it's like research wise, but I do not want anyone in the industry to have to go through anything like that. But particularly things based on weather, you need a lot of years to be able to test things and to gain that information. It's not sort of like some things where, oh, we'll just grow it up in the lab every week and test it there. So some of that continued funding is really key. And I think there's been such a good coordination across everyone that it's really a really great example of how you can really make strides to solving these industry problems.
Absolutely. And it's quite exciting to hear because it sounds like once you guys have this funding, it's going to hopefully bring a lot more opportunities for new folks to participate, whether that's in various careers like you're mentioning, engineering, on the environmental sides of things.
Well, it's interesting because there's so much wildfire work, and I know talking to a few people who deal atmospheric sciences and the wildfire Forest Service people from Missoula fire station, and he didn't mean to be rude, but he laughed when I told him the problem because that's not what they focus on. But I was like, but you guys do all this work. You can measure these compounds. I need your information. So we had to explain this new issue. And they were just like, one of them really liked to drink beer. So when I was sort of like, the hops are not going to taste good. And he was like, that's a problem.
I get it.
But it was very unique from how people think about a lot of the atmospheric weather, a lot of the fire aspects of it. I mean, smoking has been used as a preservative for years, but it really does, guys, for those of you that have ever tasted, I feel you drink the wine, you swallow or spit it, and then I get 30 seconds later a mouthful of cigarette smoke. It is not pleasant. And that's that tainted, that really high level. It's not something that is pleasant because someone's like, but people smoke out fish and things. And it's like, it's different. What's happening in grapes is different. It's not pleasant.
Agreed. And I want to add on, I know we've been talking so much about wildfires and how they impact the actual vineyard as a research component, but we also have learned with past wildfires and just the amount of smoke in the air that it's, can lead to unsafe working conditions for our workforce as well. So that's certainly something we've had to pay a lot of attention to and try to figure out ways of, not only if there's a wildfire event, where evacuation zones are, what is kind of safe thresholds for employees to be outdoor, whether with a mask or not. So we've put a lot of effort into trying to understand that aspect too. We have during harvest about probably more than 90% of California wine grapes are harvested mechanically. So with a machine harvester, but that still does require employees. So we could get, as far down the line on smoke research and is this safe or not to pick. But if we don't have a workforce who it's safe for them to be out there, then, we have other problems. So we're kind of looking at, research on both sides, ensuring that we keep our workforce safe as well.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I do remember 2020, people were out picking grapes and it was just like, no one should be out breathing this. So there are those human safety concerns that there is a lot of information out, but we've never had to worry about it. And as you said, Natalie, wildfire season really, it also happens when you'd normally want to go pick the grapes. But we don't want anyone's health to be impacted from that.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So before we close up, we only, we have about 20 more minutes here with you. And I really wanted to touch on how this is reshaping viticulture careers. How is it changing the landscape on who's coming to the table and trying to support some of these challenges? And as the effects of climate change increase and wildfires and smoke exposure is a regular thing, if you can even share how it's impacted your work. I know I also have here, how do you see the careers in viticulture changing because of these challenges?
I can give sort of my opinion. I don't think currently they're changing very differently. I think the people who are showing up to seminars and getting information and trying to understand the problem, so being open to all of that, are going to be more successful in the future, because it's very much like any weather event. What do I do if a frost happens? And I don't know how much California has frost, but I started winemaking in upstate New York. It's a problem all the time. or, you know, the latest bug or this. You're really sitting down and getting that information so you know what to do should this happen. And I look at this as being along the lines of that for people wanting to be vineyard managers and viticulture, getting educated on the problem and knowing what to do. And the people who are willing, and there are a lot of people who do that, because we speak to people all the time through the West Coast Task Force, other things, who are willing to collect that information. A lot of some of the larger places have put in their own testing and things along that. And I want to say I know a lot of places who sort of share some of their baseline information and things, because of course not every winery has the funds. The testing is pricey, unfortunately, and we're trying to see if we can not have it be that pricey, but it's expensive and there currently isn't a lot of ways to get that down. But I look at that as it's you still have your vineyard and viticulture careers, but you have this new product or problem that you have to be educated on. So it's sort of like all of these growing crops is hard. There's a lot of things to worry about. So it's let's call it your latest pest that you're going to have to add to your list of things to be aware of, and all the techniques that go with that.
I think that was a good way to put it, Elizabeth. It's just something else to kind of add to your toolbox if you're looking to get into viticulture. And I think it offers more realms for people to specialize if someone's really into air quality and how air quality with smoke interacts with vineyard, with different soil types, with different rootstocks. I think it just adds another layer of a whole segment of, of a field that folks can go into. We also learn a lot with I think it's going to open more opportunities for people in communications as well, and policy, to really understand how to communicate what's being done for research, bring it into the policy realm. Like I said earlier, we have to take very complex issues, kind of dilute them and make them more easily accessible and easier to explain.
Oh, I might have to send you, Natalie, for something. I was just trying to work on a graphic for that threshold thing that made sense. I might have to send it to you to see if it helps. But no, I think communication, because smoke can be scary and everything that goes around smoke is scary. But as I mentioned before, from the problem we're looking at, as in grapes and wine not tasting the way they should, it's not all throw up your hands, you can't do anything, but communicating that has been a huge way. And I know we always try and work on communication and as I said, I do nerd out, and sometimes we do it on purpose, guys, but most of the time we want everyone to understand why, because someone's like, just fix it this way. And I looked at them and said, if it was that easy to fix, we would not be having this conversation or need this funding. I would love it for the wine industry to not have this problem. Because then we could go on to work on something that tastes nicer. Purely from
Elizabeth, a lot of that goes into if we just focused on the core problem, which is wildfires even taking place, period, and put a lot of more effort into just management of our lands and trying to ensure that wildfires can't spread as we've seen them do in the past.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. So then is it changing how folks are learning in college about enology? And
we include smoke when I teach the chemistry and biochemistry of wine. I don't know if Patty's put it in viticulture yet, but it is something that is listed now. The students, when we train them on spoilage, they get trained on smoke. So I want to say we don't have a course on smoke taint, but actually that's something I know we see in the future as we're starting to put together strategies and things, because I'm going to do a plug. We have the ASCV symposium this year, guys. It's on smoke. But I do see I know we're working on drafting up a big risk management guide as part of putting all this research together for the end of this grant. And I could certainly see a short course on everything you need to know about smoke exposure to grapes. Probably a couple years out, guys, but I'm certain there will be things. We want to get to the point where it's like, and you can do this versus this is how it works. We're at this sort of understanding that this is how everything works. And now we want to move it into these are things you can do.
Yeah, I would just comment. I mean, like we said, wildfire smoke really became an issue more in 17, 18 here. And just in that time, it's already being implemented into curriculum at the university level. We were looking at the 2018 Farm Bill and realized that there was no mention of anything on wildfire smoke in the Farm Bill in 2018 as it related to research. So that's something we're trying to get added into the upcoming Farm Bill. But it's just interesting to see it's really been, I feel, a short amount of period of time, and we're seeing what it's the curriculum being implemented. At my role here at the California Winegrape Growers, smoke takes up a pretty big portion of my my everyday, my weekly job, which just back 5-7 years ago it wasn't really even on the radar of the workload. So yeah, it's certainly an issue that came up quick and really devastating. So it's taken up a lot of, I would say, everybody's work across the board.
I do want to say, though, because this is something in research, someone asks me sometimes, because there is research for the sake of scientific knowledge for figuring things out. In what's happening, we are getting closer. Someone's like, do you see something where we won't have to worry about this anymore? And it's like, yeah, I actually do see that end line. Like, I can see it. We're not crossing it yet, because there are some pieces of science we still have to work out. But unlike some things, it's like, no, there's going to be applications, whether it's you can spray this in the vineyard, or this is something you can measure in the air to, if your grapes are impacted, you can, I don't have anything yet, guys. I'm using this as an example. There's a special filter that'll remove, this. We are moving in that direction. So there will be actionable things you'll be able to do from all of this work and research. It's just, I can't really give people a predictive timeline on when that's going to happen.
I love that. Some speculative product design potential.
Like, we know, we've seen it. It works out on paper, guys.
Right.
A couple of them work out on paper. Getting them to work in real life is different.
It's the innovation, and hopefully some young professionals can come along and really take that.
Oh, I have a student that's ready. He's like in his first year of his doctorate. He's like, when this works, can we turn this into a company? And I said, I love the when it works. I'm with you all the way.
I love that. Awesome. Well, I think that covers a lot of what we had hoped to discuss. Do you have any advice? We have a lot of youth alumni. We have a lot of folks that we help with workforce development into the industry. And so do you have any advice for young folks interested in enology, viticulture, and growing grapes? Do you have any advice for them before we jump into questions?
I think go out and see if you can talk to people who work in the industry. I mean, not just like the tasting room people are great at wineries, but, say you're interested, see if you can chat, showing up to a seminar like this, sending some questions to people, or if you have a local university, or even if you want to just go volunteer in some way. Learning about it and seeing if it's what you want to do is big. And then I'll also say you need to be able to lift 50 pounds regularly, guys, in the wine industry. So push-ups might be required. It's a requirement for students to get a degree with me. It's like, you got to lift this regularly.
I think that's one case of wine, Elizabeth, is that? Or two cases?
Yeah, but repetitively, like one case, safe lifting. Don't, lift with the legs, not with the back. But because I did have a student once who couldn't, and I was like, that's not okay. But I do think the experience, seeing there's seminars like this are great. Conversations like this are great. And there's a lot of different ones on completely different aspects of the wine industry. So.
Yeah, my, comment would be, if you're looking to get into viticulture, enology, anything in the wine industry, you very much need to be okay with change. This is an ever-evolving industry. I guarantee if you join the industry, you will never be bored, because there really are new challenges that pop up every single day. New challenges, new opportunities, everything from pests and disease to smoke, to if you even want to be in the marketing side, finding new varietals or how to market wine, different formats to offer wine in. So there's really just, I feel, an ever-ending opportunities in the industry, and really dive in and then find kind of your niche in the industry and where you want to go with it. But there are so many careers available. The California wine industry employs over 422,000 employees, and it's about 1.1 million in the US alone. So just a lot of opportunity. I would say jump in and kind of find your path. But again, you will not be bored in this industry.
And I think Natalie put it there, there's way more than just a winemaker and a grape grower. There are ways, if I could get someone who could do social media properly, or we were saying we need like a TV show that's like Top Chef, but for wine, to get people excited about it. But yeah, there's a lot out there. And I think particularly in the US, and that change and being open to it is what has made the US wine industry successful, because you do have some resistance in some of the older wine areas to change. So
Perfect. Thank you. Well, it looks like we have a question from Nicole. It says, for the less tainted wine, is there any marketing or educational outreach to consumers to help increase tolerance or preferability? I know you mentioned.
I like that question because we just published a paper on it. We're actually starting to introduce that to the industry. I think particularly winemakers have had this, and I'm generalizing, guys, it's not every winemaker, but have sort of had this, oh, I can't make the wine I always make, so therefore it's not good. And we've showed in some work, and there's another paper that came out from Australia, that it's a different wine, and there are people that actually do enjoy it. Like, we found that people who like smoked foods actually enjoy. They're not ashy, guys, but it's in that different category, and they really enjoy it. So I think it's thinking about maybe this year, because I tease, but I'm also serious. Maybe this year we have a limited edition happening that needs to get to those people. But people have thought about it as, and again, it has to do with 2017, 2020. A lot of it was just not good. We had that much smoke. So you were dealing with this huge problem where you couldn't do anything. And now we're seeing with some of these smaller fires each year that there is something you can do, but you have to rethink how you think about your wine. So there's education that's starting to the winemakers to get them to think about that. And I think as that sort of gets accepting a bit more, you'll see some more strategies for what they can do. Again, I'm like, limited edition. People love to buy limited editions.
A lot of what Elizabeth research also shows is that there are different tasting thresholds. I could taste the same exact wine as Leticia does, and I think it tastes like smoky, and Leticia could not even taste the smoke in it. So there are different, I think, thresholds, super tasters.
Oh yeah, I'm not a super taster. I'm a medium smoke taster. I have a colleague who it has a drop in it, and he's like, this is vile.
Yeah, so I think a lot to learn there, which, someone might even prefer a wine that has a little bit of that smoke flavor. Yeah. So certainly an area to explore, and I think we could use some marketing and communications help on that.
Yeah, it's got a lot of opportunities there, but I think we're finally getting to the point where it's like, let's talk about this. And
do like a specific pairing with other smoked foods and.
I mean, or we looked, I don't remember what the results, but we looked at, what if you provided information on the label? You ignore it, you say, oh, there's a smokiness as part of the wine bouquet. And then you actually, which we find saying, this devastated this and that, there's a guilt factor that you want to avoid. But that middle one looks very
Great question. Nicole, did you want to add?
No, I think that pretty much answered it. I was kind of just curious of what work is being done in that area, and also related to how we are educating the public about the problems that wildfires are having to the industry. So I wonder, especially, I kind of like your idea, Elizabeth, of like the scarcity mindset of like limited edition, but really also kind of how, because I feel like for the majority of the public, we want to support our farmers, we want to support the industry. Mm-hmm. And so if we can explain how these wines that are coming out are a result of these natural disasters, it might be something that the public is more willing to support.
Well, and I think you're right. I think they are. And something that I'm out of the loop on, because I only have so much time in the day, but I know a lot of other people and students have had ideas, really enhancing social media to get some of the information out in snippets so that people can, it's not just all, awful anything. It's like, know this about your wine, know this. Because someone's like, oh, I'd never buy a 2020. And I was sort of like, it kind of depends on where it comes from, guys. Yeah. Like, I've had one that was really nice.
Perfect.
And we're always open to new ideas.
Yeah.
normally we sit down and say, does the science make sense? But we've looked far and wide now and brought some ideas in from areas you would never think about to see if we can do something with them. So
awesome. Any additional questions from our audience? Okay.
And I will just put another plug, because I think I'm on sabbatical, but the West Coast Task Force annual online seminar is normally the beginning of June for people who are interested. And I know, Letitia, it looks like you put the link in there. So if you guys want on who's ever doing that, because every now and then based on travel, we swap people out, but you'll sort of get the latest on many things, not just the research we're doing, but I know some of the insurance information and legislative things provide sort of the latest update happening at sometime in June.
Yeah, thanks for plugging the task force. I know the link is in the chat. If you guys want to check out that website, there's a lot of how-to guides that are meant for the industry to really talk through best practices. If there's a smoke event, what can a grower do in the vineyard? What can a winery do? It has information on wine grape contracts, crop insurance, all of the latest research kind of posted there. So it really is meant to be a one-stop shop for all things wildfire smoke research.
Perfect. And how can folks stay connected with you and the amazing things that you're doing?
Well, for me, I'll go first, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Our office is located in Sacramento, California. Again, we represent all California wine grape growers. If you're ever personally interested in getting connected with wine grape growers, I'm happy to facilitate those connections. We have a lot of communications that we put out here. I'm happy to always share those with you. Kind of in and around, I guess, Sacramento and all of California, driving around. So, I mean, reach out by email. Leticia, you're welcome to share my email with anyone on this call, and happy to just answer any questions that you may have.
And I will say, if you want to keep in touch or see what's happening with us, I mentioned I'm part of the Oregon Wine Research Institute, and we have our Vine to Wine newsletter that, oh, this is bad that I don't know this. It's at least monthly. It might be bi-weekly now. But you'll hear that's where a lot of, if we're giving seminars or talks, we're having our annual grape day in, I want to say 2 weeks on a Tuesday, where we're going to be introducing some of the consumer work to people. I travel quite a bit at different meetings, and I know I was at Unified this year. You can always, if you're in the area, please do shoot me an email. If you go to the Oregon State University website, you can easily send me an email that way. But I want to say probably sign up for the Vine to Wine newsletter or OSU Extension. I'm not Extension, but a lot of our stuff, Alec Levin, who works in the project, goes out through him.
And we have a newsletter from the West Coast Smoke Exposure Task Force that you can also sign up for. And Elizabeth mentioned the Unified Wine and Grape Symposium that's held in Sacramento at the Safe Credit Convention Center each January. And it brings in about 10,000 members of the industry just over a 3-day show. Very expansive show, trade shows, educational exhibits. I think it's a great opportunity to even just learn more about the industry.
Oh, yeah. No, particularly if you're interested, there's a lot. And I will say, purely from a research standpoint, the American Society of Enology and Viticulture, our annual conference where I mentioned we have the symposium, is going to be in Monterey this year. So not a bad place to be. I think it's the week of June 19th, 17th to the 19th. I really should know these dates. I'm on the organizing committee. But that's very much, that is specifically research. So our symposium will be research, smoke research. And then I think there's a microbiology section and a winemaking section, and there's going to be an integrated pest management session, but that's all the research specifically. We're Unified. I consider Unified, you still get a lot of really good information, but it's not quite diehard science as ASCD is.
Yeah.
Well, that's great to know. I'm actually in Marina, California, in Monterey County, so maybe we'll see you.
Please come.
Thank you so much, ladies. It's been a pleasure to talk with you, and I look forward to getting this up and sharing it with everybody. And thank you so much.
Thank you
for attending, joining us as well.
Thanks.
Great.